Rand, I need another episode of Fully Cinematic.
There are certain annual traditions that are as synonymous with Christmas as exchanging gifts. Each December, countless people decorate a tree, reunite with obnoxious family members, wear fugly sweaters, wash down turkey and candy canes with eggnog, and watch a certain holiday-oriented cult classic at least once. Every year, the succinctly titled A Christmas Story is broadcast for a full 24 hours straight, beginning on December 24th. And even though it initially premiered in 1983, it never gets old. Ralphie's quest to land his white whale of a Yuletide gift has touched the nerve of both kids and adults alike across multiple generations. So hop into your bunny suit, make sure your air rifle's locked and loaded, and come along as we take a look back at Children's Story. A Christmas Story. And oh yeah, there will be spoilers. Looking back on his youth in northern Indiana, a middle-aged Ralph Parker recalls one particularly memorable holiday season in the 1940s. 1940 to be exact. Beginning with a trip to Higbee's department store in order to drool on the corner display window while gazing adoringly at the assorted goodies inside. The apple of his 9-year-old eye that year, a Red Ryder 200-shot range model air rifle with a compass in the stock. After being asked directly what he'd like to find under the tree, Ralphie makes the mistake of blurting out his fondest wish at the breakfast table. In response, his mom pisses in his cornflakes and utters the dreaded phrase, "You'll shoot your eye out," by way of an explanation. This NBA-grade power block is followed by a daydream, during which Ralphie guns down Black Bart's roving band of marauders with his carbine, which he's nicknamed Old Blue, in order to protect his family. After dressing for the cold before heading off to Warren G. Harding Elementary, Ralphie's little brother Randy is wrapped in so many layers by Mrs. Parker that he can't lower his arms. At recess, our young hero's buddy Flick is dared to lick the school flagpole by a fellow student, Schwartz, and after accepting the challenge, finds that he's stuck like Chuck and is immediately abandoned by his less than concerned classmates when the bell rings. Earlier that morning, Flick had downplayed Schwartz's assertion that anyone touching the metal pole with his tongue during winter would become stuck. Once their teacher, Miss Shields, notices Flick's predicament through the window, firemen and cops show up, and she eventually escorts a bandaged-tongued Flick to his desk. To his credit, he never snitches on Schwartz. Nevertheless, Miss Shields assigns the composition to the class in what may be a punitive measure. On the walk home, Ralphie, Randy, Flick, and Schwartz are waylaid by local bully Scut Farkas and his pint-sized do-boy Grover Dill. Back at home, Ralph gets to work on his assigned essay explaining what he wants for Christmas, only to be interrupted by the arrival of his dad, who fights off the next-door Bumpus family hounds to the door to announce his win in the contest.
This should be interesting.
That night, after refusing to eat his meatloaf, Randy's convinced to clean his plate by Mrs. Parker, who goads him into showing her how pigs eat. And the sloppy little bastard gets his babe on. Once the contest prize is delivered, Dad pries open a sizable crate, which he believes is stamped with the Italian word fragile, to find a lamp with a fishnet-covered leg as a stand. To Mom's dismay, said lamp is set up in the front window after a place is located amongst the dozens of plugs in the wall outlet and is admired by a crowd that gathers across the street, to Mrs. Parker's further embarrassment. After being chased to school by Farkas and Dill, Ralphie turns in his essay, ridiculously hoping that it'll somehow inspire Miss Shields to convince his parents to buy him his beloved BB gun. That night, the family heads to town in order to buy a Christmas tree. After a tire blows out during the ride home, Mr. Parker attempts to change it in under 4 minutes. But unfortunately, Ralph's first time helping Dad out results in him accidentally dropping the lug nuts, prompting him to explain in frustration. When he gets home, he's made to bite down on a bar of soap, and when asked where he heard the dreaded expletive, he blames Schwartz instead of admitting that he learned it from his dad. And that's pretty much par for the course when it comes to snitches. Subsequently, Ralphie's mom phones Mrs. Schwartz, who immediately beats the brakes off of her son. After receiving a Little Orphan Annie decoder pin in the mail, Ralph listens intently for the coded message during the radio show and feverishly works to decrypt it, only to discover there's nothing more than an ad for Olds.
Oh, hell no.
Anyway, while Dad battles the furnace for supremacy, Mom accidentally knocks over his cherished lingerie lamp, breaking it into several pieces. After an attempt to glue it back together fails miserably, he buries it next to the garage. The next morning, Miss Shields returns Ralphie's paper with a grade of C+. along with the warning that he'd shoot his eye out if his wish was granted. Dejected during his walk home, Ralph responds to an ambush by Farkas and Dill by beating it out of Scut, while cursing like Tony Montana for so long that he has to be pulled off by Mrs. Parker. Fearing for his big brother's life once Dad hears about the profanity, Randy hides under the sink. But surprising both boys, Mom keeps it to herself. Seeing no other option, Ralphie resolves to make his rifle request directly to Santa himself. After waiting in an interminably long line with Randy, he finally makes it to St. Nick's Lap in a department store, where his mind goes blank. After coming to, Kris Kringle lays out the infamous line before kicking him down a slide. The Parkers kept Christmas Eve night off by trimming their outrageously tall tree, and the following morning, Ralphie awakens to a snow-covered yard and a tree swamp with presents. He and Randy unwrap socks, which they toss, but when Ralph opens Aunt Clara's pink bunny suit, he's forced to try it on. Dad gets a can of Simonize for his car and the blue bowling ball. Disappointed in his gifts, but relieved that his pops allows him to take off the rabbit onesie, Mr. Parker points out a box behind a desk, which happens to contain none other than a Red Ryder air rifle, which he's purchased behind the missus's back.
You know what I'm saying?
Ralphie takes his new toy outside for a spin, only to shoot his glasses off, and to break them while blindly searching for the Coke bottles in the snow. After successfully convincing his mom that he was the victim of an errant icicle that fell from the garage, the Bumpus hounds invade the house, wrecking the turkey. Consequently, the family then has Christmas dinner at the Chop Suey Palace, complete with a duck, whose head is still attached when served. That night, Mr. and Mrs. Parker enjoy the harmonies provided by the group of carolers gathered outside in the snow, while Ralphie drifts off to sleep clutching his beloved BB gun, which is, in his words, the greatest gift that he'd ever receive. For an 80s film, A Christmas Story is surprisingly inclusive. Despite falling into the Hollywood cliche of killing off a black guy first, which takes place during Ralphie's daydream about protecting his Cleveland Street homestead from an ethnically diverse band of creeping marauders, multiple African-American students can be seen at Ralphie's school, which is more than can be said for the Breakfast Club, for instance. Although set more than 80 years ago, A Christmas Story features concepts that kids can still relate to today, including being punished, dealing with bullies, crummy writing assignments, receiving unwanted gifts, peer pressure, and of course, obsessing about that one dream item that seems just out of reach. While it only grossed a fraction of the box office of contemporary releases, Terms of Endearment, and Sudden Impact, it nevertheless managed to become just as iconic as its rivals. After all, when was the last time that you saw a Terms of Endearment marathon? Director Bob Clark originally conceived this passion project after hearing writer Gene Shepard describe his childhood in Hammond, Indiana, including holiday memories, during a 1960s radio broadcast. His dream wouldn't become a reality until 6 days before Thanksgiving in 1983, when A Christmas Story, which includes Shepard narrating as an adult Ralphie, was released in theaters. After years of repeated airings on cable networks like HBO exposed the film to a wider and more receptive audience, TNT presented its first 24-hour marathon of the growing cult classic in 1988. Eventually, sister station TBS took over the tradition, annually broadcasting the movie repeatedly for 24 hours, beginning on Christmas Eve. A Christmas Story reportedly served as the inspiration for the Wonder Years television series, which shouldn't be entirely surprising given that Mr. Parker comes dangerously close to embodying the tired sitcom trope of the bumbling dad, with the furnace, the dogs, and especially that whole fragile business. Luckily, he proves to be wise and level-headed by the time the credits roll. That part, in particular, could have turned out quite differently, as Jack Nicholson was reportedly considered for the role. But Nicholson, of course, managed to go on to breathe life into other classic characters. Someone who was actually cast went on to further Hollywood success as well. Ralphie himself, star Peter Billingsley, will serve as a producer on the 2008 MCU smash Iron Man, in which he also cameos as Stark Industries scientist William Ginter Riva. He would reprise the role 11 years later in the billion-dollar grossing Spider-Man Far From Home. Billingsley apparently has an affinity for holiday movies, appearing as Ming Ming in 2003's Elf, pulling double duty as actor and producer on 2008's Four Christmases, and Billingsley and Vince Vaughn also produced 2022's Christmas with the Campbells. If all that weren't enough, Billingsley also starred in a sequel to A Christmas Story in 2022, which he produced alongside his Four Christmases co-star Vaughn, among others. He also helped to develop the story. A Christmas Story Christmas features Ralph returning to Holman, Indiana 33 years later, and also brings back Randy, Flick, Schwartz, Scott Farkas, and Ma Parker as well. In case you didn't notice the pattern, Billingsley appeared alongside his buddy Jon Favreau in the first 4 movies, and Favreau directed Iron Man and Elf. In other news, it's time to check out a few comments that we got on previous shows. After watching the Jurassic World Dominion review, Danielle M. said, "I'm surprised you didn't like the original characters. I actually got excited when I saw Sam Neill and Laura Dern." Yeah, I gotta be honest, Danielle, I didn't give it when those two showed up. In response to that same episode, the expert 843 said, "The thing that made Jurassic World Dominion not great was the plot. In a world where dinosaurs are everywhere, this is the idea y'all came up with. It didn't give any reason to bring back old characters." Yeah, now see, this guy gets it. Shout out to the expert 843 and Danielle M for dropping comments. And shout out to everybody who hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But I had enough of this conversation and I'm logging off. Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, and have a wonderful Hanukkah. Feel free to watch this video over and over for 24 hours. I triple dog dare you.
Fully cinematic.